Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Caro Insights. We've got a great guest today. I'm going to introduce to Adrian Stratta. He is a retired officer in the British Parachute Regiment, 20 years experience doing transformations around the world, a wide variety of industries. Great insights from that, and really keen on empowering people and enabling people to get their jobs done. And I must say, probably finally and importantly, he is an author. And so I'm sure we're going to hear about the book sometime during today. It's a great book. So looking forward to hearing more. So Adrian, maybe just step back. Tell me, how did you get here in your life?
Yeah, that's a very good question. One I ask myself all the time, Mark, because how did I get here? That was part of the reason for the book, actually. Dusty boots to boardroom. Follow your dreams. It's the follow your dreams bit, I think. I kind of touch it. And the reason why the book came about was because I spent nearly 20 years in the army, which is great. Learned a huge amount. I wasn't sure what to do when I was at university. I met my wife at university. She was trained to be a doctor. And I was in the TA, Officer Training Corps, as well. And I went off to go and look at this thing called the Parachute Regiment because I didn't really know who it was. All I knew, it was this poster from my wall of some chappie in the desert somewhere. And I absolutely loved it. It was sort of a clashing of symbols. It all made sense. They kind of liked what I was saying and doing, and it was a coalition of the willing, should we say. But that really worked. And right from the very, I mean, I went through the whole Sandhurst and training thing, and within 2 weeks of arriving in Para, we were parachuting into the Oman. I mean, it was all big boys' dreams all come to fruition at once. I was very aware that I was a little cog in a very big machine very quickly. And there was, it's a just recently tested war machine from the Falklands, so there was some very able things. And my platoon sergeant said to me, he said, "Adrian, if you ever stop laughing, it's time to leave the army." And that's it. I did. I laughed for 20 years. It was great. So from that point of view, it was great. Ups and downs always, but it's helped me, my life lessons all the way through. I mean, you don't realize the subliminal learning you're doing. Yes, I was a young leader, but the young platoon commander versus the company commander, very different animal, because you've learned and you're understanding the environment you're in. And it's fair to say, I was unsure what to do. I knew I wasn't going to go into the city and make money. That wasn't me necessarily, but I was fascinated how business made and took their decisions. I was very fortunate I was enabled to do an MBA through the military, which very few people do. I was very lucky, and that was like a light bulb. And it was all about change and transformation. And I was involved in the first ever putting the first ever balanced scorecard into defence, which was amazing, because how do you evaluate the value of defence? And they had an old system. I can't remember what it was now, but it was your moral, physical, and conceptual power. And then we were trying to put it into a business. What's the value of the Padres candles? I was always being asked that one. I mean, it was great, huge value. But what's the pound, shillings, and pence versus a Challenger tank or a combat aircraft? I mean, so that was fascinating. The worst job I did in the army, but the best job I did for my commercial career. And so my last job in the forces was in South Africa. And I was there working for the Foreign Office, really helping the South African Ministry of Defence to restructure and reorganise themselves, which was fascinating. If all jobs were like that, I'd still be in the forces. But actually, it was the adding back piece I loved. It was transforming not only there, but the previous job in the MOD, introducing the Defence Balanced Scorecard, was all about adding back and looking at the military through a completely different lens. And that, I think, shaped a lot of my thinking, a lot of my processes. I was fortunate to be offered a job by PwC and Deloitte, come and work for us, which would have been fascinating. And I would have loved to have got the T-shirt, but I think regrettably, I turned them down both, because they were just going to shove me back into the MOD from where I was escaping. So what was the point? Where do you move forward? But yeah, it's nice to have that name behind you. But I've already had the name. I already had the military. And the whole point of the journey. So we drove home from South Africa. My wife and I were cashed in our flight tickets and drove the length of Africa. Hence the book, Follow Your Dreams. And events happen. So that was a story of about resistance and resilience and just getting through, really. But what I really loved about writing that book in lockdown in COVID was the ability to look back and understand the perception of what was happening and think about it. And it was that whole reflective piece, which was great. Because the last chapter was all about how does the military mind adapt to the commercial mind. And for 20 years of restructuring, turning around. As the interim, you're sort of, no pun intended, parachuted into a company to sort of get the reins of a business that's going in that direction and it should go in that direction, which was fascinating because all of a sudden you have the levers of control, but an agenda from the board or the investors or whoever to go in a certain direction and change the business. And it was just like being given a mission or a task to go to somewhere new that you hadn't expected to go because there's a problem. So I thought it was absolutely fascinating. How does the military mind adapt to the commercial world? And it's something we've spoken about. And I loved your mnemonic of the VUCA, the sort of where you're operating in chaos and you're operating in confused, uncertain, and ambiguous spaces. And you could probably tell us about that a bit more. But that's been my life. That's what I've always done. And that was always that in the existence. So the military role was you dumped into something. How are you going to make that work? As an interim MD, director, or whatever it was in a business, you're put into a position of, yes, nice, it's to have the authority, but how do you actually turn that business around? And that's what I think we should explore, because actually, how does that military mind work and how does that, and so what's the relevance for business, which I think you want to get to, which is great.
Absolutely, because most of my life has either been spent in a small business or in a large business. And in the large business, you know that it's structured in large organizations, hierarchical, silos. It's why I was fascinated when I was in the corporate world about integrated business management to try to break the silos down. But, it was a great structure for like the Tayloristic model when we call it LAMO, linear, anthropocentric, mechanistic, and ordered. There are still big signs of that in the corporate world. And my favorite is we still believe that a 12-month budget is possible and sensible.
I think that's growing, but yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And, when everything tells us it's not. And yet many of the practices, formal, informal, and the way that the behaviors are formed, in many large organizations are a legacy of this type of thinking. Yet at the same time, people are saying, yes, but we've got tariffs, we've got financial crashes, we're in a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. Right? And so there's a lot of talk about it, but I feel not enough so what discussion in terms of double click, what does that mean for us as business people, as executives, as employees, and translating from an old-fashioned world to a new-fashioned world. Why I really wanted to talk to you was because, as so many of these things are, you double click and find VUCA was invented in the military. And you got there first, right? And so it's innate in your world. And so maybe with your lens of having something that was innate, but 20 years later, you could help give some advice about what might be relevant from the lessons of VUCA in the military to the business world.
No, absolutely. And I think the VUCA world, I mean, I think when I was going through training and stuff, it was all about the OODA loop as well, get inside the OODA loop. So, observe, see, do, act, or whatever it is. So stuff is happening. How are you reacting to it? I'm going to pick up a word you used slightly earlier, which was the so what factor,
Yeah.
which is great. Being there's like a light bulb going off in my head because we would I'm going to talk about a thing called mission command, which is now becoming very business centric as well. And something you've picked up on is that, was it about 28% of people only really understand the corporate strategy? Most people do not
If
understand
that.
the corporate strategy. And when I came through training, the strategy was a thing to keep the door open, wasn't it? That was it. Ignore the strategy. Well, a lot of time and effort goes into that strategy. If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. So that's a thing that needs to be addressed. So mission command is quite a theory, a doctrine. It's certainly been prevalent for my period in the military. It's only sort of doubled down and got more so and sort of thought about.
So can I just stop you there? Sorry. Mission command, what do you mean by that?
So mission command is a mindset of how you're translating your task to your people. And do you understand that task at the very high level? So it can work at the very strategic level of we're going to invade country X or not. We're going to protect country X these days. And so, what's the grand strategic plan? Does everyone understand that plan? And at every stage, you ask the so what question. So what? What are the actions on? What if this doesn't happen? Because, if you've got your strategy and you're going from A to B, and VUCA, shit happens, excuse my French. So what? What are you going to do about it? All the way down to planning very detailed operations. No plan survives contact with the enemy.
Yeah.
Certainly being in the parachute regiment, it was very important for us because you can't guarantee all the commanders leave the aircraft and survive on the ground. If you're starting an operation or planning an operation or an exercise, it doesn't really matter. Nothing will happen to plan because the friction of life of jumping out of a plane is inherently complicated, difficult, and nothing goes to plan. So we've always operated in this period of environment of chaos and confusion and making sense of that confusion. But it's the triggers. Are you measuring the right things? Are you adapting to or seeing the right triggers or seeing the right turn of events, or are you reacting to those turn of events? The same in business as it is in the military world. The military just has a different connotation of what you're going to do about it. So there's the so what factor, and there's the mission command. So going back to the plan, you're doing your plan. You're going to do X, Y, and Z. Does everyone understand? Me as the commander, I'm giving my mission, and I say also what, and I then have to feed back my confirmation of that mission. So you're asking me to X, Y, and Z. That means I've got to do A, B, and C. Is that what you, higher commander? Do you agree with that interpretation? So automatically, there's a confirmation that I've understood the strategic direction and my part in that strategic direction. And then I then have to cascade that down. So the same process happens to my junior commanders, and it's like a whole cascade up and down the chain of command, if you want to call it a chain of command. So it's everyone's on board. But then, of course, in the parachute regiment, pre-jump insertion, everyone's briefed on the plan. So we have it's a thing from the regiment, airborne initiative. If your commander's not there, how are you going to step up and carry out that mission? Well, I don't necessarily see that in the commercial world necessarily. Although I've got a quantifier that I know I'm going to say about it. Is how does the military mind then compare to the commercial world? But just finishing on the mission command, there's all these actions on and so forth. So it's a mindset of how you're passing information from this is your mission, this is what you're going to do, down to a tactical action. And it's that cordial thread, that golden thread that's going to operate all the way through the business. So all elements of that organization can't be siloed because they're all tied together by the mission. It's a very agile and flexible organization. I'm in the parachute regiment, and we have our airborne gunners, we have our airborne artillery, we get signals, we get logistics. All those things are bolted together to create the mission. And they're constantly changing. So it's a bit of this, a bit of that. We form, reform, restorm, norm, train, and you build up trust. So it's a training thing. That's because in the military, this is what I was going to go on to say, we think in a collective way. We think in a we are going to achieve it. Whether it's me or somebody else is irrelevant, we are going to do that. Whereas in the commercial world, and this is what I say in my book, is that the commercial people, they're at the contact battle they're fighting that war all the way through, and it's attritional. They're going to do X, Y, and Z. Yes, new companies could come and they can rewrite the rule book, etc., and they don't have their legacy issues. But that's the point. Everyone in the commercial world is individually focused about what they can do because they can't stop and collectively train. You can't take BP away from being BP, train them up and put them back in as BP 2.0. Just can't do that. What you can do is take people out. So you can take someone out from their role in that business and train them up, but then they go back to the same business appointment that they left with the same constraints and everything else around them. So you've got to think differently about how does the individual develop and nurture their skills and bring those other attributes from other parts of business together. And that's comes back to your VUCA uncertainty and how do you do that? And there's various ways, and that's where the mission command. Well, that's just adapting to making sure that people don't operate in a silo, but they're rewarded as individuals as well. So my bonus as a sales representative to go and win that business, never mind if that business completely throws the rest of the organization out of whack and it's misaligned and it misses its targets, I've got my bonus and I've been rewarded. So it's got to have a collective element to it. And I think that's been an interesting learning point all the way through.
There are ways in which you can make commercial organizations more collective. If you have a leader that focuses on communicating what is the vision and mission of the organization, it starts making people enabled to do something. So there's, two statistics. One of them you said is there was an Australian study, and they gave the executives who should know what's going, and a multiple choice test, and only 28% of them could recognize their company's strategy, vision and mission level strategy in a choice of 4 multiple choice options. And there are many statistics to show that really we might good at communicating annual budgets, that's the targets, but we're not so good at communicating this is the high level goal and this is the high level strategy in which to get there so you can do it. Because the other thing, what happens is, you must have seen in the parachute regiment, the plane drops out, but the gunners land in the wrong place. The radio's broken, or whatever horror story I'm sure you can tell me, and they have to make decisions on their own. But
Exactly.
and
And that's my point.
yeah,
That's exactly my point, that everyone's told what the mission is and their part in the mission. And and they can see the sort of how it stitches together of what could happen, because nothing will go to plan. And that's the inherent reality of warfare, really, or even peacemaking, the whole, whatever environment example you want to give. But I think that's right. I think everyone's given the budget, Mark, and in commercial worlds, and they're told, and everything's measured in a financial way. What I loved about the balanced scorecard argument, it was financial and non-financial. In fact, the financial targets are only a quarter of all the targets employed. How very interesting. And in order to do the balanced scorecard, I'm not going to leverage on that, just on that thing, but it was a way, do you understand your engagement and part of in the business? And actually, do you know who you're interoperating with, if that's such a word?
yeah.
So it brought people together in a planning process, but it was very hard. It was very hard to get it rolled out into the way people are thinking. And the old military used to have this, what is the moral component of warfare? Does everyone understand why we're here to fight or
Yeah.
what we're here to do? I mean, we don't do that in the commercial world. You don't sit people down and, like you did with Barry, and say, right, Barry, you're here to fly this plane from A to B. What are you here to do? Is it to empower that businessman in the back, or take that person on holiday, or what? Who cares? I'm just there to fly the plane because that's my part in the wider business process of going from A to B. I think it's more than that. I think Barry completely understood that actually he's invested in getting that plane from A to B in the smoothest possible way, not only for his own outcome, but for the outcome of his passengers. And they recognised it was a team play on the aircraft as much as it was the wider air traffic and engineering and fueling and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's one example. But then you're operating in a sort of slightly closed environment of an airline or a transport company, because you're in that area, although you're operating in other people's space, but you're in an environment that you can control some of it. In business, it's completely different in some regards, because if you're trying to sell computers or whatever, is my computer is better than another computer? So there's a quality issue of your intellectual property, if you like. Will people buy it for that price point? So there's so many more variables in some regards that you've got to overcome. And everyone's got variables to deal with, but how do you deal with variables? Therefore, you get expert silos that only see part of the business in that sort of not necessarily myopic way, but they can see that piece. So how do you bring all that together? How do you stitch all that together? My earlier argument, right, if you give them the overall, we all understand the strategy and their part in the strategy, that's the bit that's missing for me. If everyone understood their role in the wider plan, therefore it shouldn't become as a shock.
So I'm just about to expose my military incompetence and lack of knowledge here. But, I'm thinking in the military, you say, we've got to attack this position 3 miles away, and we're going to do a left flanking attack, not a right flanking attack. or whatever. Right. So
You're
for me,
sounding competent to me.
that's a simple rule. So if you do get landed in the wrong place, you know that this mission is going to be in a right flanking mode, and so that you can adapt by knowing that rule. So look at look at the classic business examples you find in textbooks like EasyJet or Southwest Airlines. They know our rule is we are going to win by being no frills service. So if you find yourself somewhere in New Mexico ordering the food supplies or whatever it is for you know what the high level rule is, so you're likely to make a good choice in what you're doing. It's the same, am I going a left flanking attack or a right flanking attack? But far too often in business, you ask people, and they don't even know if they're winning by left flanking or right flanking. All they know is they've got to try to win the budget.
So that's the feedback loop, isn't it? Are they getting the right feedback loop? Here's an irony that EasyJet transport more business passengers than they do holiday makers.
Yeah.
Which is an irony, isn't it? Whereas Ryanair is completely opposite. So what is it about no frills that is really no frills? But actually, you would argue it's destination point to point.
Yes.
So if you're Ryanair and you're going to a European city and you land 50 miles outside that European city and it takes just as long to get in.
Or it is a flexibility on upgrade. So you can have the speedy boarding and you can have the seat allocation. And
but isn't that clever?
Yes.
Because your price is actually being stretched now. We're flogging you a flight for 30 quid, but actually it costs you 300 quid to get from A to B. How does that work?
But for me, there are simple policies, whereas businesses that fail, they get lost. Because if you ask 10 people in the business, what's our mission, how are we going to win at high level, there is no answer.
And I find it amazing. I mean, I was the business transformation director for a large transport company that had all versions of all formats of travel, 47,000 employees across Europe, and individually within that is a federated business as well. So company X wanted to do so and so, actually to this, there's no, you do it this way. So how do you get people on board? And I think that's the fascinating way. I mean, that was transport. So it's taking people from A to B, largely, your customer, yes, or your stakeholder is public sector because it's the local authority that's providing a grant for providing that service, and then people pay. So it's a complicated billing environment, if you want to call that. How do you get people on board? How do you get the customer service? How do you get all those people to say it's a good train ride or a bus ride or whatever ride works? So how do you mandate that? How do you mandate the efficiency of the business? How do you mandate the engineering of that business? So many different modes of getting people employed. And I would wager a lot of time and effort was spent on getting the strategy out and understood. I still reckon your statistic of 28%. Why is it 28%? I'd take issue with that as well. But how come that only a third really understand the strategy? Because it's not relevant. If you're driving a train or a bus, actually, do I really need to understand the strategy? Well, yes, you do. I would argue. But how, where, and why, and where is that relevant? And what we used to do to increase efficiency we used to have these communities of expertise. So you'd bring the engineering people together, you get the driver productivity people together, and they would have their forums and so forth, and you'd integrate the two. So it's that cross-fertilization of ideas and the impact of your driver on that engineering and so forth, and then fuel efficiency. Well, if you've got a heavy lead foot, we can measure your lead foot, so you're using technology again. So actually the whole thing was a coaching environment where, yes, we might have been in the head office trying to direct something, but actually we're passing that down. So it's that whole servant leadership, that whole devolving and empowering. So the point of the spear of that business was actually the driver, the most important person, or the pilot of the plane, which is Barry, right? He's the point of the spear, and he's actually conveying that strategy to the passenger. How are we enabling him? And I think that's taken your OODA loop completely in full circle, and you're starting at the other end to make sure they understand the strategy.
Yeah, if I think about what is happening in the modern business world, again, I see patterns in the military. So the military has always sent out scouts and people as far away to the outside to be the information gathering sources. That's how information is gathered. Whereas old-fashioned businesses like to think, oh, well, there's going to be a centralized unit of competitive intelligence and they'll gather documents. Whereas the reality is information on what is happening on how to win is at the coalface. It's at the extremities. Maybe is there anything, as you look back on your time, about information gathering that could be applicable to modern business?
It's huge. I mean, the point about the military is where and how do you um, amalgamate your forces to apply greater power over and above your enemy. If your enemy in the traditional, I mean, Second World War or even First World War, you're all in trenches and you're shooting at each other, or in the old days where you're marching with a little drummer band and Napoleonic were forced to close and beat the hell out of each other. That's quite interesting. The modern military is diffuse. It's a complete spread. And actually, Afghanistan, Iraq, dare we say Northern Ireland, who is your enemy and how do you understand that enemy? And it's who is the enemy today is the ally of tomorrow. You go to the modern conflicts of the Middle East or Ukraine. Who would have thought we'd have war in Europe again? So how do you get that intelligence? And it's a whole cascade. I mean, no plan is written without the intelligence assessment. So actually the intelligence is gold dust, and it should be for business. So what's happening out there? You've got the human intelligence of the people at the front line. What are they seeing? What are they happening? How's that get filtered back and digested? You told me to attack that hill. Actually, there's twice the number of enemy on that hill than we realized. That's not going to work. So intelligence is absolutely critical, as it is in planning your logistics. I mean, the military, like business, likes to concentrate its resources in certain areas where it can then overwhelm its components. And if it's diffuse or you can't pin the tail on the donkey, as it were, because it's walking around and disappearing, that's a very hard scenario to operate within. So then the corollary of that, what then you have to do is empower the lower level commanders to bring back that information and tell you. That's your sales force is out there doing information and feeding that bit. But then how do you collate and how do you bring all that information back? So as intelligence is only information that's been assessed and gathered
and organized.
Absolutely, no different to business.
That's why, in McChrystal's Team of Teams, he talks about making it a regular discipline of common dashboards that everyone has access to the 100%. Same information. And the goal of a leader is share. That is share and make sure the system is sharing so that people in the line of battle can make the right decisions with the right level of information and up-to-date information.
But in the commercial terms, and that works for military, obviously, because it's lives. But in a commercial, I'm the sales director and I'm going to do a sneaky little deal over here that's going to make me a lot of money because I'll get bonus on that way. And what do I need to share my information? That's my gold dust. And that's the theory. That's the breakdown of you've got to sort of stop that behavior as best you can, because that could actually, well done to the businessman to get that extra contract. But is that helping the business and where does it fit? And it'd be a very hard organization say, no, you can't have that business. I mean, you've got to adapt and accept it as much as you can. I was working in an airline business, turning it around from loss to profit, and we won a bit of business. But actually, that bit of business, useful, well done, actually increased our cost and our overheads significantly, and it really did not fit with our business plan. So we had to spend money to make that work. So it was not a useful bit of business to win. We still did it and made it work, but it really not
choosing your fight, which fights you want to. Not every battle is worth winning, to win the war.
Flexibility is a principle of war.
Yes, indeed. Brilliant. Adrian, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much. If you were going to give a new business person 3 bits of advice from your lessons in the military, as they're starting out their commercial career, what would they be?
You've got me there. Well, you've got 2 of these and 1 of these. So listen, understand your environment. So listen and understand your environment. Don't be dogmatic. Actually be utterly flexible and listen to and understand what happens. So listen, understand your environment, and then actually have a bit of confidence to ask questions. So ask. So I think they're more soft points rather than hard skill sets. Understand your environment, listen and learn. But actually, if you see an opportunity, don't grab it and don't be selfish about it. Share it, because you could be the next hero, but you'll be a hero amongst the team.
Brilliant. Fabulous. Thanks for that, Aid. Great conversation. Looking forward to more. And by the way, final plug for your book, please.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Dusty Boots to Boardroom. Follow Your Dreams. It's on Amazon now.
Great. See you later. Thanks a lot. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Brilliant. Thank you.